My experience with WM really started in the 80s when my mom was diagnosed. And back then, there really weren't treatments, and it was pretty sad demise. She withered away much back in the days, just sort of similar to an AIDS patient. And she just withered, and finally one day said to me that she'd had enough and to stop all medications. So it was, for us as a family, she was only 73. It was losing your last parent was pretty tragic. And I was 31 years old and thought I little gypped in life because I lost my mom. But so then when I was introduced that I had Waldenström's, officially diagnosed in 14, but all my symptoms and everything, when I look back at my blood results, was really 2011. I had all the signs and symptoms, and I had an infection back in 2011 that lasted 4 months, and I just couldn't get rid of it. But back then, I didn't know I had WM, so I was able to hang on to my job and teach a few more years. And but then in 14, I was diagnosed. I was given a chemotherapy treatment that lasted 17 weeks. And at the end of that, the predominant thought was that 2 years of chemo maintenance would be good. So I did that and finished that in 2017. Well, I was really fortunate. When I was diagnosed, I live in a small town in New Brunswick, Canada, and it's you know, a small community hospital. And I knew I was going to go into chemo, and for 17 weeks in a row. And
Yeah.
if I didn't declare sort of what I had to people, I knew that the rumor would be out that I had stage 4 or something, and I was on my way out, and I didn't think that was fair to anybody. So I wrote a letter to the community and explained what my circumstance were. And one of the alumni from our school was a support group leader in the Atlantic Canadian Support Group, and immediately got a hold of me and said, look, I have WM too. I've had it for a few years. There's ups and downs, but we have a group that gets together. And I said, well, that sounds pretty neat. And my wife thought that was a great idea. So we joined this support group. Just idiosyncrasy. My mother had never met another WMer, and there I was, having been diagnosed, and because the WMFC, which is the Canadian Foundation for Waldenström's, had these support groups, and one of them in Atlantic Canada. So I joined that. Then when I was really excited and interested and pleased, and then one of the members of the WM board came down to visit us and asked me if I would join the WM board for Canada. And I said, sure, it'd be nice to have an Atlantic Canadian on it. Unfortunately, shortly after I joined the board, I know a year, maybe a little more than a year later, the leader of the group left, and I ended up somehow, because I'd recently retired and had some time, I became the chair of the board for Canada. And I really, really enjoyed that. It was maybe too much work because there's no paid employees in Canada, but we have over 400 WMers who belong to that. And we have, I don't know, 8 or 9 support groups, and we had raised over $1 million for WM research, which was pretty good. And I think that's so meaningful when you get a rare cancer that there's no cure for, and to be able to share with other people is is wonderful. So that's sort of my experience with the WM support community, and it's been very rewarding.
It sounds like there's a lot of, sharing of each other's stories and support that you can give to each other, through these interactions. What's your favorite part of, those interactions that you have?
I think the favorite thing is the sharing of the stories, and the WM is a different disease than some, because there's two fundamental aspects to it in affecting your bone marrow. And I sort of think the two interact a little differently with every person. So there's sort of a saying we have: if you've met one WM patient, you've met one WM patient. So my symptoms are not exactly, or in fact at all, like my mother, but all my symptoms that my mother had, I've met lots of WMers who have those symptoms. And likewise, I've met lots of people with my symptoms, but nobody have I ever met who's had exactly my symptoms. And until very recently, with big centers, the diagnosis of WM has been very inconsistent, and very, very difficult for a GP to diagnose WM. And when people have sort of these little symptoms, it's very hard for, I think, GPs to send them off to a hematologist. So, how do you get all that stuff to work together? So lots of challenges with WM, but the best part is certainly meeting.
Yeah. So what advice would you give to somebody that was in your shoes when you were first diagnosed? So somebody that's newly diagnosed today, they find out that they have this rare blood cancer. What do you wish that you would have known when you were first diagnosed, that you could perhaps, impart that knowledge onto a patient or person?
Well, the first thing I'd love them to know is there's a bunch of people who have had WM now for 30 years and are still going strong. So there's a confidence, a comfort that you acquire when you start to know the WM community a little better. And that's something I would advise them very much to do, is join a support group. And today's world is better than pre-COVID, because pre-COVID everybody met in person, and then if you weren't living in a big center, you didn't have access to it. Whereas today there's lots of virtual WM meetings, and you can join those in the States, you can join those in Canada, Canadians can join the American ones, Americans can join the Canadian ones. So there's lots of sharing and interaction. So I think those, join a support group and do your research, that there's lots of us who are going to live 30 years with this disease and not their life be determined by the disease.
Yeah, no, that's great. In terms of, before you were alluding to the fact that it could be a real challenge to, diagnose Waldenström's, given that, it could be a lot of different symptoms. It's not a straight up, doesn't automatically trigger what the diagnosis would be. You really do a workup. Do you have any advice for physicians out there in terms of, the experience that you went through? How can we do our jobs better? Or anything that you want to, I'm part of a drug development team. Is there anything that you want us to know in terms of, how the patient experience might be better in a clinical trial, or what we can do?
No, I'm very admiring of the clinical trials that are available, and so pleased that they are available. And I certainly encourage anybody who is able to join a clinical trial. I still think and I don't know what the answer is, and I have no advice to anybody, but I'm sure it's true that the rural areas don't have WM patients diagnosed nearly as well as urban areas. And usually because most big urban areas have one or two doctors that are WM specialists, therefore they talk to the hematology group, therefore the hematology group's a little more aware, and therefore a little more liable to do that bone marrow. So I hope there's a greater awareness of WM, because it mimics so many other diseases, and therefore I think it gets missed.
It sounds like people are really engaged and willing to share their story, which is nice, because there's nothing like gaining some support when something's new to you.
And there's nothing like sharing your information so that the next generation of patients that are going through this journey have it better than last. And I think that's my responsibility. I look at my mother, and there are all the WM patients that have volunteered and done things since her non-treatment to the time that I had it, with all the treatment that has been available to me, and how lucky and blessed I am.
There's a lot of good research going on right now in Waldenström's. What are your hopes or thoughts about what the next 5 years might bring with Waldenström's?
Well, I said earlier, I'm on the board of the IWMF, and our vision is a world without WM, where we, sort of my thinking is, my mom had it and I have it. I hope my kids don't, but I hope my grandkids can't have it. So you don't know, but boy, if we make the progress we've made in the next 30 years that we've made, that the last 30 years, there won't be WM. We'll have had the solution, and we'll have moved on to looking for other problems to solve. So that's certainly, I'm admiring of the IWMF's commitment to that, and I really truly believe that we can create a world without WM, or if it is WM, it's just it's no more than having a sprained knee. It's just something you live with and you bat away. So I think it can happen, and I hope it will happen. And I think, sometimes I don't think us patients, we get focused on ourselves, have enough appreciation for those folks who are delving into this and staring in those test tubes and looking at those mice and analyzing those, looking at all that analysis that comes out of the computers. I mean, it must be torturous and slow work, and us patients just owe it to people like you and the researchers who are so dedicated. And sometimes maybe we just get a little too cocked up in ourselves and not acknowledging the tremendous work that's done by the researchers, and how dedicated they are, and how important it is for us.
Well, it's been lovely to talk to you, and I enjoyed listening to your story and your involvement with the Waldenström's community.
Well, Aileen, I admire your dedication to helping WM patients have a better journey in the future. And it's if it is ever helpful to talk about your journey, I think it's our responsibility to do that. And I just go back to my mom, and if I can help the next generation be a little more avoiding of this circumstance, then that's all the better. So it's been lovely meeting you and talking to you and being part of this. So thank you very much for this opportunity.